Hey, Glenn, how you doing?
Good.
Want to hear my intro?
Sure.
All right, here we go.
Hello and welcome to Device Squad, the Propellix Enterprise Mobility Podcast. Device Squad, fighting crimes against enterprise mobility around the world. Bad UI, frustrating user experiences, poorly conceived mobile strategies, we defeat them all.
You like that?
I had to put myself on mute because I started to laugh. The delivery of the whole device squad.
This podcast series will cover all aspects of enterprise mobility, including strategy, development, design, testing, and more. My name is Steve Brickman. I'm a mobile strategist and UX architect with Propellix. I'm also a stand-up comedian, which is why I got picked to run these things. I don't claim to have a lot of comedy material around enterprise mobility, but I'll do what I can. First, a brief history of the company. Founded in 2011, Propellix is a mobile strategy consultancy helping enterprises worldwide devise true mobile strategies and develop world-class mobile applications across all industry verticals. Propellix clients include large companies such as Amway, Bright Horizons, Bank of Montreal, Dubai Airports, Family Dollar, DLL, Cintas, Merck, and many more. Propellix menu of services includes 8 different mobile kickstarts covering everything from mobile strategy and road mapping to MCOE to UI UX design to mobile testing, along with soup to nuts app design, development, and support. Additionally, Propellix offers 3 homegrown enterprise mobile products. Joining me today is Propellix Senior Mobile Strategist Glenn Gruber. Glenn recently spoke at the first ever Glance conference in San Francisco. You could check out his blog post about it on our website. We've got him here today to talk about the conference, the Apple Watch, and the state of enterprise wearables in general. Why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your background and how you wound up at Propellix?
So I've been involved in the tech industry for the past 20 some odd years, both working on the product side as well as in the consulting and IT outsourcing side of it. And I've been involved in mobile for at least about 8 or 10 years. That's not even including some of the stuff I did back at Kyocera. Yeah, it's something I've always been interested in. I'd always worked at different consulting companies or different product companies. So, I mentioned Kyocera, but also worked for a couple of startups in between. And then prior to coming over to Propellix, I worked for a couple of IT outsourcing companies with primary delivery in India, but with a focus on actually working for ISVs rather than for enterprises. And at the last company, Nest Technologies, I helped start their mobile practice.
Wow. And at what point did you decide to sort of make the switch to go enterprise strategy?
Well, as we start to do a little bit more with mobile, we weren't, the company was really, Nest was more focused on kind of just the outsourced development aspect. And I thought that there was opportunity for more to be done. And so actually a friend of mine introduced me to Adam, one of the partners at Propellix, and I kind of liked what was going on there. And so I decided to make the switch. I met him and I met you, if you recall, at that Mobile Monday up in Boston.
So what is it about enterprise mobility and enterprise strategy specifically that kind of drew you in?
I've always been interested in kind of like process reengineering and process design. And so I think that the opportunity that mobile presents to really take that forward significantly, in the enterprise has some interest to me. I think a lot of what goes on in the consumer-facing side of mobile is, of course, very interesting and probably pushes the boundaries far more than what happens within the enterprise. But at Propellix, we have the opportunity at times to do some things that are customer-facing. But I think it's also important to try and make an impact on what goes on within the enterprise. How can we make employees better and more efficient at their jobs via mobile? and not just create better consumer experiences. Both are important, but I think that it's nice that at Propellix, we get to do a little bit of both, but of course, with the emphasis on the employee-facing use cases.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, it's pretty cool, like pioneering this new way of doing things. My career's gone like, well, do I go like agency, go into advertising, or do I go into enterprise? And the enterprise stuff was kind of more of a surprise for me in that I've always leaned more towards the creative side. But really, what we're doing is so much more meaningful and has so much of a greater impact, not only for the businesses that we're designing new apps for and whose like processes are getting streamlined and everything, but for, for the trends that we create and for the other businesses that follow these trends. I mean, obviously I'm biased, but I feel like we're the best. I feel like the products that we create are amazing. The amount of attention that we put to the user experience end I think is a rarity.
Yeah, no, I agree. Certainly on the enterprise side where user experience is not often a priority for many IT organizations, but that, of course, is changing.
What do you think of the current state of enterprise mobility?
I think that we're getting to be in a good spot. There are many companies, some of which we work with, who are pretty advanced in developing and executing against a mobile strategy. And they get held up as that icon of what to shoot for. But there's still a lot of companies who are only first beginning to address it. And a lot of what's been done, I think, has been more about buying stuff. People talk about mobile. Okay, well, we need to manage those devices. So let's get an MDM platform. And then there's the security elements and the other infrastructure elements. That's necessary, but not sufficient for creating a mobile strategy. So a mobile strategy needs to start to look at, all right, now that we have all this stuff to manage it, what are we managing? What are we deploying out to our employees and the different users that we're serving? And how well is that helping us achieve our business objectives? So I think that that's a big gap still.
Yeah.
So hopefully we've kind of gotten over that hump of buying the big platforms, and that also includes like the analytics and the testing and the development platforms and so on. And maybe now we'll get more companies starting to focus on, all right, what do we really want to achieve? And how can we not just deliver the first version of that app, but how do we make that better and start to treat these things like products the same way that you would treat them when you're deploying to the end customer for whatever that business happens to be.
So you've been with Propellix for what, like
2 years? Almost to the day. Yesterday was 2 years.
And what do you think's been your biggest challenge so far?
There's logistically, the biggest challenge of, there are different projects and, it's kind of how things come up, kind of not knowing what's coming next. But that is also interesting. It's just maybe not as great for my family in terms of planning other things. The other challenge, which has been good, is that I've stretched, like I've gotten a chance to do different elements of mobile that prior to coming to Propellix I wasn't exposed to. So there's always a lot of good learning. It's always good to be able to stretch yourself, and Propellix has provided a good opportunity for that.
Yeah, and I mean, in terms of like a specific client, like one strategy session I was involved with was with a room full of about 50 older gentlemen, all in suits. And so trying to get them all to agree on like a feature set was probably my own personal biggest challenge so far with Propellix.
Yeah, I mean, well, different clients always present different challenges. It's not every client that you walk into do you have, all the dozens of people that you're going to deal with, all aligned as to what do we want to really do with mobile and how are we going to approach it. You're lucky when you get a group where everyone's really bought into the process and interested in really getting things done. But that's not always the case. But that's what consulting is often about.
Can you talk about Dubai at all? It's such an interesting project.
Yeah, it was a great project, and it was interesting on a lot of different levels. I had helped Shahab, come up with the response to the RFP, and because of my experience in the travel industry, added a lot of relevant context. And it was kind of funny that on like a Thursday we get told that we need to be there on Tuesday to present in person, for the next round. And I'm only with the company, maybe about 6 months at that point, and off I go, kind of on my own, and worked out. We got the deal, but the project itself was really very interesting. I mean, number one, it's on the other side of the world, and it's a government-run agency essentially. Airports are these huge, especially Dubai, which is the 5th largest airport, I think, in the world by passenger volume.
Wow.
These huge organizations where you've got literally 50, 60, 70,000 people working in concert to make sure that, people get on planes and they get off planes, and, the planes are in good working order and the luggage shows up where it is. And you have all these people, walking through the facility. So there's a tremendous opportunity for mobile there, but it stretches such a wide variety of different roles and activities that, it made it just interesting, to try and capture those. I mean, the ideation sessions I think we ran 13 ideation sessions over the course of a couple of weeks and came up with more than 650 use cases, which for Propellix was kind of, I think, a record by a wide margin. So that was really interesting. And then working with all the different groups on the technical side of things and try and tie it together. It was a fun project. It was one where we weren't sure what we were going to get necessarily. And, it turned out being one of the most interesting and rewarding engagements that I've been on.
I still regret not going on that.
Yeah, it's okay. It was a good breaking in period for Enerson. So
that would have been fun. Yeah, so our Kickstart engagements run about 1 to 2 weeks, and then obviously they go longer as need be. So Dubai was a several week engagement.
Yeah, that was like 8 weeks, 9 weeks. I mean, some of that was because we had time off for travel, but some of them have been just a couple of weeks. Some of the other projects though, where we do, a full strategy from, ideation and developing an app roadmap all the way through to, the evaluation of the readiness of the IT organizations to take on the mobile projects.
Right.
Have gone, 4, 5, and 6. I mean, the recent project that I did with a large pharma on the West Coast, was basically like a 7-week project, but that was a soup to nuts one as well.
You recently attended that Glance conference and you spoke at it. Why don't we talk about that a bit? How was that experience?
It was really good. It was, I saw it originally because Horace, Dedu from Simco, I read his blog regularly, and if you're listening to our podcast, you should be reading his blog too. Posted about it, and right now, the watch is 9 months in, maybe 13 million watches into or so, and I think a lot of people are not quite sure what to make of it, or where the big win is from the watch. How does it? Really, what role does it play in our digital lives, or could it play? So I thought it was a good opportunity to hear some really smart people talk about it. I guess they lowered the bar a little bit and let me speak as well on one of the panels. The person who led the panel was Maribel Lopez, who is an analyst at Lopez Research and also someone that we partner with at Propellix for our Mobile Research Council.
I can't help but wonder if wearables isn't sort of in the enterprise isn't sort of a much ado about nothing situation, at least for the time being. You hear so much about wearables, but I haven't had to do anything with wearables other than design a potential watch app for one of our own Propellix products.
It's this shiny object syndrome.
Yeah,
it's kind of like the next big thing. And it may in fact become a really big thing. I think that we just don't know yet. They're not just one thing. It's not just a watch or a sort of wrist-bound device. It could be smart clothing. It's Google Glass being another example, which I think has some really powerful use cases associated with it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that glass will ever be a mainstream product. But I think in certain instances where a heads-up display and hands-free can be really valuable, that can have a lot of value. But that's glass was launched like 2 years ago, and that hasn't found a whole lot of traction yet either. So it's hard to say where wearables in the enterprise is going to go. I think there are some basic functions that it can serve. I think the watch as part of an identity management solution can be really useful. But how much is it going to really interact with day-to-day processes? Is it going to replace other devices? I don't think we know yet.
Yeah, I feel like maybe we'll see some value in this idea of being able to add like a digital layer to the world around us. I don't know if you've seen this Google Cardboard. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
We got one. I got one for one of the kids. It's pretty amazing. It's getting down to now at the toy level because Viewmaster has a similar thing, except that Viewmaster allows you to use the camera. So the camera is projecting the outside world into the goggles, and then it's applying a digital layer on top of that. And that seems to be the most relevant use case, I think, where somebody can work hands-free and say they're working in a warehouse or like doing inventory or something. They can look at a barcode and the device will tell them what it is.
Definitely. I mean, I think one of the challenges with something like cardboard versus glass is the fact that that, or even HoloLens from Microsoft, or the Samsung VR product, is that all of those kind of close off the rest of your field of vision.
Yeah.
So I think it limits its utility in the enterprise and in completing tasks in their current form. I think there are good uses for VR. I saw a video of what Volvo is doing with Microsoft HoloLens as part of an enhanced showrooming opportunity, which is really cool. And maybe that's something that we could I could send you a link to that. We can put that in the show notes. But those are cool things, but they're not. Again, it's not something that you're going to do while walking around. It's because of the lack of the field of vision. So
So just to return, what were some of the big takeaways from the Glance conference?
So it was interesting because the one thing that everyone really agreed on is that Apple's going to sell a hell of a lot of these, and for a pretty good value with ASP is over $400 at this point, with an expectation of between 20 and 20 million this year. And I think it was Ben Bajarin who estimated that maybe 100 million total sales by the end of 2017. So they're going to sell a lot of them, but the question is, what are people going to be doing with them? That's less clear. There were a couple of use cases. People talked about gaming. There was a lot of discussion of the 3 tent poles of the watch, as A, as a timepiece, B, as an activity tracker, and then of course different communication type of device. But at least from the conversations I've had with people who own watches, as I'm standing at the line at the airport, it seems like right now it's just the adding up of a lot of little moments, is why it's valuable to them. I mean, the people that I've spoken to, yes, it's all these little things. It's getting the notifications. It's while you're traveling to be able to stay in good contact with your kids or your wife or husband, what have you. But there's been no major killer app as it were. And actually, it doesn't look like apps are necessarily a primary part of what people are using the device for, what they're getting the delight out of. So
Yeah.
it's it's interesting how the model and the utility isn't quite the same as what we're used to with smartphones and tablets, at least not yet.
In your blog post on our website, you mentioned this idea that the Apple Watch doesn't truly represent a new paradigm, at least not yet. So I was wondering, what really, first of all, what defines a new paradigm, and what's the significance of whether something is a new paradigm or not? What difference does it make?
So I think that quote was attributed to Glenn Solomon from GGV Capital as part of the VC panel that went on. And yeah, the question is this going to be anything significantly different, or is the watch going to maintain its current role as sort of an accessory and extension to the phone? So if it's only an accessory, if it's just providing you notifications, then the amount of value that it creates is limited to just that. I think what people are wondering, is this going to be, a whole new, style of computing? Are we going to use this in a different manner than we use our smartphones and tablets today? And if that's the case, if it opens up new possibilities and enables, completely different use cases than what we're doing, then that's where some significant new value really gets created. I think that was kind of the position, from some of the folks on that VC panel.
I see. So that somebody would actually could conceivably have a watch and not have a phone at all, and just somebody who doesn't need to use the phone aspect could maybe get by with just having the watch.
Yeah. And, and something else that I was thinking about, again, because of the limitation of the display of basically a 1-inch, 1.5-inch square, there's only so much that you can accomplish in the same manner that you would accomplish it, on a device with a larger screen, like a 5-inch screen on a smartphone or so. Are there going to be different ways in which you're going to interact with that device and, the watch, and the information that you get back? How is that going to be presented to you? So, I think voice can become an important part of that. And then also, instead of worrying about displaying certain data on the small screen, maybe that's something that just gets airplayed to larger screens that may be, within the ambient computing environment around you. I always look at science fiction as a good predictor of future technology.
Yeah, sure.
And just, all the times where, whether it be Kirk, Picard, or anyone else on Star Trek would, they tap their comm badge and say,
"Computer on, record."
And then sometimes it was a voice response.
"Recording, dear."
"Computer, you will not address me in that manner."
Other times, it's something that would get displayed on the main viewer or some other screen that's on the, the conference table desk. So perhaps that's going to be the new method of interaction.
Yeah, so then this idea that screen size is proportional to session length, then that kind of goes out the window at that point, right? Now you've got either unlimited screen size or indeterminate screen size. So do you think it would still hold true then? Do you think there's something deeper going on with this relationship between session length and screen size, or is it just very specific?
Well, I think, if the kind of science fiction fantasy that I have comes to fruition,
"Computed, dear."
then I think that screen size thing, goes away entirely. It could even be that, is the screen even important? Maybe then you do get to, you're using a comm badge rather than, a watch. or you don't really need much of a display at all. So then I think that the whole session thing changes. And I think that, the advancements that we're seeing with voice between, advancements in improvements with Siri, with Cortana from Microsoft, with Google, if voice becomes a primary method of interaction, then I think that you can do some interesting things. And if you're, could again have the results displayed on some more appropriate, larger screen, then you can have a much more extended session via the watch as the communications mechanism. But it's not, then it's no longer quite the same idea of the device as we're looking at it today.
Yeah, I can kind of see that happening, sort of in the way that there are some Internet of Things devices that there's one light bulb that has a speaker built into it that's an AirPlay speaker. So I wonder if maybe eventually the same thing will happen with screens, where we'll have a dedicated screen somewhere, or maybe all over our house, and these devices will be allowed to communicate with the screen sort of ad hoc. I mean, any device could communicate with any screen, and maybe it just lights up the screen that's nearest us.
Yeah, that's how it works on Star Trek.
Yeah, or else it'll just get sent directly to our retinas.
Yeah, I mean, and if you, but if you think about it, then it kind of gets back to, and I think that this is something that was framed by, I think, Benedict Evans, where he talks about, is the phone, a dumb piece of glass with a smart cloud behind it, which is kind of the Google approach, versus, a smart device that's supported by content and information that comes off of the cloud. Which is more the Apple approach. And you look at, the TVs that we all have today. I mean, most of them are smart TVs, but I don't know too many people who are using them in a smart way, because most of those interfaces kind of suck. So it's really still about, the devices that you're connecting them to, whether it be, Chromecast or, Apple TV, or simply AirPlaying off of, another device.
So for the time being, at least, the Apple Watch is sort of, you said it doesn't necessarily have a specific use case, but it's comprised of a collection of small moments. Can you talk a little more specifically about what these small moments consist of?
Well, it can be really anything. It's these, notifications. The conference that I went to was called the Glance Conference, because glances is the primary thing that people are doing with the watch. They're getting these little notifications. They're seeing short messages and maybe responding back to them. But those interactions are really very short in duration. I mean, how long does it take you to just kind of look down at your wrist, quickly perceive something, and then move on?
Yeah. It seems like Apple is aware of this very early on, because I remember they used the word glance even before the watch came out as a name for a screen type.
Right. Yeah, I think that's part of it, is just understanding that, with again a 1-inch screen, like how much can you really hope to do on that device? I think it's why a lot of apps haven't translated very well. Not that many people seem to actually go to that app home screen and then pick an app to use, unless it's, the activity app, or maybe they want to listen to music, but you're not doing stuff per se, on the watch the way that you would, on a phone. And some of that is because the lack of, or the limitations in the input mechanisms. I mean, you've got the digital crown and you've got force touch, but you can't type. You can't. You can dictate perhaps, but you're certainly not going to do anything. Forget long form, not even barely short form or medium form, on that kind of device. So I think there's an inherent limitation that, if you can't do anything big, then you have to do things that are little. And that's kind of where the glance comes in, and why the average session length, from some of the research that was presented, on the watch is about 7 seconds, as opposed to, a little more than 30 seconds for a typical average smartphone interaction and almost about 4 minutes for a tablet interaction.
Are erring in that they're putting too much interaction in their watch apps?
I think that's certainly what happened at first, and in large part, no fault to their own. I mean, yeah, the first apps that were developed in a vacuum without a real device to work with to have in your hands. So you were kind of doing it like blindfolded and one hand tied behind your back as you were building those. And I think that once people got the device and they looked at, all right, here's the app that I built. How well does this really work in the true environment? They found that maybe didn't what we thought wasn't quite the way it really worked out on the real device. So I think that there were a couple of companies who pretty rapidly redesigned their application. And I think people realize that you have to shorten and edit until you get down to a very, very focused use case. I think at the conference it was Josh Clark who spoke about that. I think he also mentioned that in some of the Google Wear design guidelines, it said, if your interaction is more than 5 seconds, you should really go back and try and reduce the scope of what you're trying to accomplish. These can't be complex.
Yeah.
So it's you have to really think about it differently. And again, you've got completely different interaction methods with the digital crown and force touch than you do with smartphones. I mean, there is now 3D touch on the newest iPhones, but for the most part, that's very much a secondary method to the keyboard.
That's interesting. It's such a subtle distinction. I remember when the iPad first came out, they assumed that it was going to be primarily like a media consumption tool for people. They would watch Netflix and surf the internet and so forth, but there wouldn't be a lot of work done on it. And now the iPad Pro is out and suddenly they're talking about two-handed interaction. The software is updated to allow for this sort of side-by-side interaction, one app to another and things like that. And they're sort of working to increase the amount of interaction that can be done with the device. And now it seems like the Apple Watch is like the new consumption device, only just in vastly abbreviated or truncated formats and so forth.
Yeah, again, it's the challenge of every time that there's a new format or form factor that's put out there, it takes people a while to figure out what it's best for. I think that the media tablet or media consumption thing is probably more of a Gartner fiction than anything else. I'm not sure that Apple looked at it as only a media consumption device, although that's what happened a lot. They made sure that they delivered pages and keynote and numbers designed specifically for the iPad when it was first launched. I mean, Tim Cook says that's basically his primary computer right now was his iPad Air. So I think that there's a lot that can be done. It just all can't be done exactly the way that we're used to doing it on laptops and desktops. So for some people, kind of the changing the way in which they work, as well as having tools that are optimized for that device, is a tough road to hoe. Particularly when you had no support for Microsoft Office up until about a year ago, useful support, I should say. It made it hard for that to be a primary device to develop content and do work when the primary tools in Office weren't available to use.
Do you have any predictions for when we might start to see some of these new technologies being adopted in the enterprise? Did that get discussed at all?
It did, and frankly, more by the VC panel than anyone else, but they were seeing very limited opportunity for the watch in the enterprise. I think one of them had an investment that was using the watch as part of their solution, but it wasn't necessarily the primary purpose. And I think it was replacing pagers. I think it was for doctors and nurses to communicate with each other within the hospital. I think it's going to be really limited. I mean, it could be used as identity, but then you've got to get, for multi-factor authentication, but, then everyone's got to get a watch, and so that's harder to do. And also the capabilities between, Watch and Android Wear, I think, are still pretty different. That's challenging to really plan around. So I don't know. I mean, other people are saying that maybe the way that the watch is going to get into the enterprise is that insurance companies are going to subsidize the distribution of watches to employees so that they can get better health and wellness data about the employee and therefore improve and optimize the rates that they're charging from a health insurance perspective. And so maybe that's another tentpole to getting in the enterprise. But that one seems pretty weak to me in terms of deploying it in the enterprise. It's really going to be about, where are those opportunities for use cases? And if it remains, at least for, the medium term, that it's all these little, micro and nano moments that are really the crux of the value of the watch. It's hard enough for people to figure out what apps do we want to build for smartphones and tablets. I think it's going to be nigh impossible for many organizations to get their head around how they're going to integrate the watch or any other kind of wearable into kind of mainstream use cases and business processes.
Yeah, sometimes it's enough of a challenge for us just to get a company to update their business processes that they're still doing on paper and port them over to the phone and the web. So
just like anything, some business processes may really lend itself, and those guys are going to move forward, and maybe 95% of the rest of the companies aren't. I think it's got to make sense. We'll see what comes out in March and April with the Watch 2 and what improvements we'll see at WWDC with WatchOS 3, and maybe that unlocks more stuff. I mean, right now there's not even really good APIs to do voice, as a kind of key interaction method on the phone, other than asking Siri for stuff. So, perhaps until that becomes more robust, that's one of the limitations. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, Glenn, thank you for joining me today on this podcast.
No, I appreciate it, Steve. This was cool. It was a lot of fun. I enjoy talking about this stuff. It's kind of why I do what I do. And I just encourage people to start to think more about what they want to accomplish with mobile rather than how do we want to manage mobile, and really start to think about what are those apps and use cases that can really improve and enhance your business, and then start building against that list.
Definitely. And if anybody wants to talk with a Propellic strategist, just go on our website to set up an appointment, and we will get right back to you on that. Thanks for listening in. I hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for our next episode.